Reverend Edwards Pinkney spoke the other years at the Left Forum. He was always with us representing what was happening in Benton Harbor, Michigan. He can't be with us this year because he's in prison at the moment. We were talking about fascism in America, and when the economy gets the way it is, this is historical fascism. We talked about this, and Reverend Edward Pinkney is an example. He is the victim of the beginning of this fascism. He is a civil rights hero of our time. He's also fighting for all of the economic rights for all of us. So he's doing both. He was charged with a felony for a recall petition. We were in the process of recalling the corrupt mayor, James Hightower, and he got between 2.5 to 10 years in prison at 66 years old. They gave him that sentence for what the Michigan State Supreme Court could only be charged ever as a misdemeanor. He got a felony conviction of 2.5 to 10 years at 66 years old. That, our lawyer said to us, essentially that's to send a message. 2.5 years is you shut your mouth and you stop your political activity and you don't protest from jail. 10 years at 66 years old, you might die in prison. So he said he's not keeping quiet. He's doing as many radio shows as possible from prison. And it's hard to support every human rights case and every civil rights case that you want to, because there's not enough time and you have to choose. He was an ally of ours, he was a colleague, but he was also fighting the entire catalog of American horrors. What Reverend Pinkney represents and what's happening in Benton Harbor touches on the entire catalog of all of these horrors. So he was fighting against the great evils of our time: free trade, deindustrialization, poverty and joblessness, corporate looting, austerity, and fascism. They shipped the jobs out of Benton Harbor, Michigan. There were 40,000 employed men at union wages, men and women, at the Whirlpool factory. Benton Harbor is as the headquarters of the Whirlpool factory. Reverend Pinkney tells a story about how his grandfather or great-grandfather were shipped out from the cotton fields to get jobs, almost as migrant workers. This is how they came up to the north and they seeded the factory with these workers. And then over time, they organized and they formed unions. And when Reverend Pinkney was a young man, and Reverend Pinkney's father was a middle-class worker at the Whirlpool factory who, with a job, could support a family of 4 and a stay-at-home mother. And Reverend Pinkney said when he was my age, there were so many jobs in that area that you could quit one job at 9 a.m. and by 11 p.m. or 11 a.m. you could be employed at another factory. And if you wanted to quit that one, you'd be re-employed at a union wage by 4. And he said that's what life was like. My greatest fear is that people our age have forgotten what a standard of living is. The more time that goes by, the more we forget. I'm sort of on that cusp where I remember my father was an airline pilot for Eastern Airlines, so I was part of that big mega strike where the Eastern Airline workers were put out of strike with Frank Lorenzo. We teamed up with the steel workers and the coal workers. So that's where my politics were formed on a picket line for 3 years, fighting against Frank Lorenzo and Wall Street. And so I sort of remember when my father could support a family with that wage until he couldn't. I was part of this whole deindustrialization process, but the younger people in their early 20s now don't remember that, and it scares me that there was a black father could go out and support an entire family, and there were 40,000 employed workers. Now there are 10,000 people living in Benton Harbor. 30,000 had to go flee to find work other places. 10,000, couldn't. Property values dropped, and they had no place to go. So now the area is a ghetto, and they're trying to displace them. I'll keep going with these slides, but what they're going to do? They're going to lock them up, or they're going to find other ways to push them out because it's beachfront property. We'll come to that.
What did they charge you with formally?
5 counts of a forgery for changing 5 dates on a recall petition. Many of you here in this room are activists. You've all been a part of petition efforts. You know what a petition looks like. It's like your name, your first name, your last name, a signature, your address, and And then at the end is the date, right? And some people will come up and say, oh, it's May 13th, and then they say, oh, it was the 14th, and they scribble it out. So it was the date at the end of the petition they said he had scribbled out and changed the date. So they count, that should have been one, if it was anything, it should have been one charge for forgery, but they counted each date change as a separate felony. And the Michigan State Court of Appeals said that changing a date on a petition can never be charged as a felony. It's only a misdemeanor under any circumstance anyway. There was an effort in the area to get Pinkney. So that's what I want to get into right now. Who was Pinkney? Okay. This was a cabal. This was a Wall Street corporate cabal. And this is what's so interesting about this case. And it all came down right there in Benton Harbor. Whirlpool. Okay, so it's the world's largest appliance manufacturer, like I said. And what did they do? They shipped all those jobs overseas. Bangladesh. Then, like I had said, I'm going to go through some of the ones where I covered. Union wages, full employment that Pinkney's great-grandparents fought for. They got them for a good few decades. And now we're in bad shape again. Now, made in Mexico, Asia, Eastern Europe. And still now that's getting too much for them, so they're switching over to Bangladesh and Malaysia and a bunch of other places because now the wages are rising there, right?
What about U.S. prisons at $1.30 a day? Are they using that too?
No, they're not making appliances in prisons, but I know what you're saying with the slave wages, with that being a form of slave labor. Benton, we talked about unemployment rates in Baltimore. I was in Baltimore beginning of the riots. This is nothing more than young men with testosterone in their veins, and they want to be proud of something. They want to build something, and you give them nothing to do. I'm surprised the riots aren't worse. It's like 52% unemployment in Baltimore, 70% unemployment in Benton Harbor.
Oh, was there a big riot there?
There was no riot. Pinkney has a ministry there of 1,000 people out of the 10,000 left. He was a reverend, so he had a parish of 1,000 people out of it. So he was the apex of this. That's why they wanted to get him. He was the only person fighting. Every other resident there is too afraid. They know that if they start anything, they're going to get arrested. The 10,000 left, they want to displace them because they want their land, and we'll get into that in a second. But they're too afraid to fight back because they get arrested. They're a targeted community. And the rich white community right next door wants to push that ghetto out so they can take over that beachfront property. We're going to get into that in a second. So they sent in an emergency manager. That's a whole another thing. Bernie Sanders was confronted by, was it you? And he did not know what the emergency manager's laws were when Evan, our DC local, asked him. Emergency managers have been trained to come in and, through executive order, loot economies like in Detroit. We have them. They're a great idea to solve. They consider a city bankrupt, and the big idea in Detroit was, why don't we sell the art in the Detroit Art Museum to Sotheby's, to the financiers all around here, and put them in private collections so that poor kids and middle-class kids can't see great art in the future? We're going to sell the art at a fire sale price to the same financiers that caused the problem in the first place. So that's the kind of stuff an emergency manager does. The emergency manager was helping steal this land from the people in Benton Harbor that was given to them during the New Deal as a beach. That was free for the community. Okay, tourist destination, home of the Whirlpool elite. It's important. The CME is in Chicago. CME is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. It's similar to Wall Street. It makes 1,000 more derivatives trades per year than Wall Street. So it's a giant financial center, and so all these stock guys go out to the Benton Harbor area, St. Joe, because they call it the Riviera of the Midwest. So it's very similar to the Hamptons if you take a look at it if you look it up, you're going to see shingled $1 million houses right on the beach. Lake Michigan's giant, so it's almost like an ocean. And it has white sand dunes. So right next to these $1 million houses and condo complexes they want to build so that the financiers, Wall Street again, guys, can go and have their vacations and their fun Hampton summers. the black community has the better beach. They have their eye on the prize. They've got the better white sand dunes, and they also don't want them near, they don't want those people near them. They want to take that over and expand their beachfront property. So Reverend Pinkney was out there with his parish and his followers protesting, and they don't like that. Okay? So then we have this guy, fascist extraordinaire, Fred Upton. This is a family that's going up against Pinkney that has 6 billionaires in it. And he's the heir to the Whirlpool fortune. He's also the chair, so this is the conflict of interest here, this is collusion. He's the chair of the Department for Energy and Commerce, which is a giant post. He's the guy who signs off on all these free trade deals to ship these Whirlpool manufacturing jobs overseas, okay? So he's currently in office, and he's the chair of Energy and Commerce, U.S. Representative.
And his brother, yeah.
And then here's his brother, Aubrey McClendon. He is the guy who brought you fracking. Forbes called him America's most reckless billionaire. This is his cousin who brought you fracking. And because Fred Upton is the chair of Energy and Commerce, he not only signs off on the free trade deals that ship your jobs overseas, he also signs off on these energy deals that allow fracking to take over from this guy. And then there's the person who's you might know, the face of the family, Kate Upton. She is, I have to find a man in the room to describe it. I don't, but Kate Upton. What this shows, Kate Upton is a swimsuit model, a nude model, and what it shows is the degeneracy of the ruling class, that they would let their daughter do some of the things she does on TMZ, and you'd have to Google some of her videos where she's dancing. What it shows you is we're not dealing with sophisticated people with integrity. We are dealing with a degenerated ruling class who are, they have no concept of the larger picture and what they're doing. Upton's college friends, Rick Schneider, he's the governor of Michigan. We all know Rick Schneider. These are all in the same family, right? Oh, college friends, I'm sorry. I thought I put the other family members on the next slide. Kevin Orr, he's the Detroit emergency manager who worked to take the property. Okay, Whirlpool's ethnic cleansing conspiracy. This is so complex. I don't want to run out of time here, but do you remember that whole movement, Turn the Water Back On?
Yeah.
Okay, that was between Benton Harbor and Detroit. It was mainly in Detroit. What they did is, these guys, so they got these 10,000 black families. They came up with ways to get them out. How do you get them out? They know that these people are so poor and unemployed. They tripled the water rate overnight. These guys own the water plant. Once they gave no mercy. Once they tripled the water rate, they didn't give you a payment plan. They didn't give you a month. They came and turned off your water right away. If they come and turn off your water right away, the next day they can send their goons out to condemn your house. If they condemn your house and your water is turned off, they can take your kids. That will force anybody out of the area. So with that, they got a couple thousand more of them to move. Their goal's 10,000. They're finding ways. You jail a few, you get the rest to move out of their house, and they're trying to bulldoze that community out of there.
That's
so
democracy. Mm-hmm. That is democracy.
That's fascism.
Yeah. No, but I'm just saying that's a myth of those words in this country.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a myth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. You get jailed if you try to exercise your democratic rights. Whirlpool's cornerstone alliance. Okay, so I told you before, they want to take that land to build this luxury golf course that continues what they've already started to build along the lakefront. And that was public land where the black community could go for free. They started to charge now $9 to use it. These are such poor people, so nobody's using the beach anymore. So the first measure was start charging for what used to be free. Okay, you see what I'm saying? And this golf course stuff is creeping over. So here's Reverend Pinkney outside of all of this stuff with a bullhorn, okay, and a bunch of black activists and also other activists who joined of all colors, and he's out there and he's yelling with his bullhorn, "You and your golf course, this is corrupt," and they don't like it. So they formed a Get Pinkney operation. And also, a lot of the people in the cabal who convicted him all have an interest in this real estate deal. This goes to, on so many levels. Some of the people on the jury, there was a corrupt jury because they all had real estate interests. They were either insurance agents or there's something in the expansion of these development projects. There's one juror in question, Gail, who was the insurance agent for this Cornerstone Alliance. Blueprint to Loot America. Yeah, this is a public-private partnership. So I'll get down into it. Hold on for a second. Yeah, the removal is what Webster talked about. We've got this is our platform essentially, and this is why our relationship with Pinkney meshed so well, because he was fighting free trade. We call for a 15% protective tariff, so it was the removal of that's why the jobs overseas. Baltimore was a world steel leader. It went to China. That's where those jobs went. So that's what's going on in Baltimore. I guess I'll just read. Law is suspended in response to economic crisis caused by free trade. Wall Street controlled emergency managers gave way to public assets. Networks of oligarchs, we talked about that with the looting of not just the museums, but the land and whatever they want. Disaster capitalism, land grabs, tax giveaways, privatization. They put the tax burden off them onto the people to pay these debts for they took a bad bond on this water treatment plant. Benton Harbor surprisingly wasn't bankrupt. They took a expensive private bond, and then they put the interest, $700,000 a year, onto the poor black residents in Benton Harbor, and they couldn't pay it. So that's why they declared them bankrupt. They actually technically weren't bankrupt. They bankrupted them and said, well, if these guys can't pick up the tab on our bad bond, then they're bankrupt. So now send in an emergency manager. That was the excuse. Ethnic cleansing it was happening in Ferguson, removal of local residents. Gifted land becomes real estate bonanza for Wall Street investors. Public-private partnerships, we talked about, make residents pay for their own removal and the profits of speculators. And here we are at the Tax Wall Street Party, fight back with a concrete economic program. Our subtitle is a fighting program to rebuild America. No jobs, no justice, no peace. And I've got to say, the equation has to be, you've got Al Sharpton and crew, and they're going to come along and say, no justice, no peace. It's got to be no jobs, no peace. Because you remember, we talked about the New Deal through all this. There was the Civilian Conservation Corps, which grabbed 2,000 tough inner city working guys, and they put a shovel in their hand, and they were proud of what they built, and they came out better for it all around. Young men like work, need it. Time to strengthen civil rights movement. Ferguson fight for 15 with mass traction economic demands. Cross color lines, stop fighting. Thing is, if you just say it's the cops, and yeah, they're awful, but it's a war zone. If you have a war zone, bad things are going to happen, okay, on both sides, and it's so you're sitting there blaming each little teeny symptom of this in this war zone. Well, we got to fix why it's a war zone. And there used to be a time that black families lived right alongside white families and were almost competing for equal ground. And as Reverend Pinkney says to me, Daniela, there's always going to be racism, but if we fix the economy, it's going to be a lot less. So I think we put the cart before the horse. Full employment driven by manufacturing. It's got to be manufacturing and building stuff. And the last thing I'm going to say is that we had this Amtrak crash, right? Right next to the rioters in Baltimore. And I was in Baltimore, and I was like, I don't want to say anybody dying is a sign, because that's a terrible thing, but what could have been more obvious? If you have a maglev, let's say from Baltimore, the New York, Baltimore, DC corridor, it's a perfect place for a maglev, and it's the sexiest of all the maglev investments ever. A maglev. A train, a high-speed rail, maglev.
Oh, magnetic?
Sorry, yeah, high-speed train. You could make the commute from Baltimore to DC 15 minutes, right? Why don't we put those guys rioting back to work building something? My grandparents used to brag, my great-grandparents used to brag about, I don't know, I think their parents, every time we drove over the Brooklyn Bridge, your great-grandfather, or one of the greats, built that. Every time. And what's cooler than building the Brooklyn Bridge? Is it smoking pot? like George Soros is
The
telling us?
answer to that may be that we have a $50 billion security industry that's grown up in the last 10 years. Someone said $100 billion, which is 70% private contractors. These people have enormous political clout, and so we don't have priorities to build things for the people.
Right. They keep saying those people have clout and we don't. We're not coming together behind some demands and making the demands.
Right.
You know what? We're all confused and we're sitting here with all these little side issues. And if we all came to and started demanding that maglev be built by these inner city workers who are rioting, and we came together behind some just obvious common sense demands, and we just fought for it, you would be surprised at how far we'd get. People say money in politics is the issue first. If you don't get money out of politics, then you're going to get nowhere, because you're going to have these Wall Street owned guys that are never going to do what you say. I'm on the ground every day dealing with this. I believe the opposite is true. These guys don't want to get primaried. If they think there's a groundswell of support for a certain issue, even though somebody funded their campaign, they'll still have to go back to those guys and say, listen, I can't do anything about this. These people are demanding $15 an hour. These people are demanding a tax on Wall Street. We got to do something, and you'll see that you will get far.
People are the other side of money.
Yeah.
There are two sources of power in politics, people and money.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King was killed because he could motivate people.
Mm-hmm.
And we've come around again, another generation and a half.
And Pinkney's in prison because he could motivate
Yeah,
people.
right.
He was somebody who could bring people together, and it wasn't just somebody, a cop and Wall Street doesn't care if if everybody's sidetracked with one issue between a police tussle with a kid, no matter what color, they care about somebody like Pinkney. That's why they went to such lengths to put this man in jail, because they care, because he's bringing all races together to fight for something economic, and that's what really scares them.
I guess they didn't shoot him.
So we've gone through our program points. We nationalize the Federal Reserve, 15% protective tariff. That brings back our jobs. And thank you from the Tax Wall Street Party for coming, and contact us at twsp.us. Right, Trust?